Hey dreamers, tonight we journey far beyond Olympus, back to an age even the gods feared to whisper about. Who were the beings that shaped the cosmos before Zeus ever raised his thunderbolt? Imagine a world shrouded in ancient darkness, ruled by titans so immense they could cradle planets, twist the stars, and write destiny into the fabric of reality itself. Why did these six brothers rise above the rest? What secrets did they guard in silence older than time? And if the titans were so powerful, what could ever threaten their reign? Hit like if you want more journeys into forgotten myths, and tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Tonight, we begin with the eldest, Oceanus. His name alone carries the weight of an ancient roar, the sound of waters rushing beyond the edge of everything you have ever known. Picture, if you will, the eldest son of Uranus and Gaia, the sky and the earth, born at the very dawn of creation when the universe was still learning how to separate light from darkness. He was the boundary itself, the living edge where the known world ended and the infinite unknown began. He was the primordial river that encircled the entire flat disk of the ancient earth, a vast body of water so immense, so incomprehensibly endless, that every fountain, every spring, every river, every drop of rain that would ever fall upon the world drew its life from his depths. Close your eyes and imagine standing at the edge of the world, your toes touching the final grains of sand before everything dissolves into the horizon. Before you stretches Oceanus, not the sea as you understand it, not the Mediterranean or the Aegean with their familiar shores and islands, but something far older, far stranger. This is the great freshwater stream that loops back upon itself, a snake swallowing its own tail, encircling all of creation in 9 coils. The Greeks believed that when the sun set in the west, it did not simply disappear into darkness, it descended into the waters of Oceanus, where it sailed back to the east in a golden cup, travelling along the surface of that primordial river throughout the night. The moon followed the same path, and the stars, those eternal wanderers, dipped below the horizon, only to drink from Oceanus before rising again, refreshed and glowing. This was his domain, vast beyond measure, mysterious beyond comprehension, and Oceanus himself was a figure both majestic and otherworldly. The ancient artists imagined him as a robust god with the tail of a serpent, scales shimmering like moonlight on water, his long hair flowing like river currents, and his head crowned with either the horns of a bull or the claws of a crab, symbols of the untamed power that churned beneath the surface of his waters. He was immense, towering, a colossus who loomed over the edge of existence itself, bending the very fabric of reality to his will. And yet, for all his power, Oceanus was not a god of violence or conquest. He was something far more unsettling in the world of gods. He was a god of restraint, of quiet wisdom, of choosing peace when war seemed inevitable. Oceanus took as his wife his sister Tethys, the titaness of fresh water and the nourishing flow of life itself. Together, they were the ultimate source of all the earth's waters. The primordial couple, whose union gave birth to abundance beyond imagination. From their union came 3,000 sons, the Potamoi, the river gods, each one a personification of a river, a stream, a tributary that wound its way through the lands of the world. 3,000 rivers, each with its own voice, its own current, its own story to tell. There was the Nile, the great serpent of Egypt, winding through the desert sands. There was the Strymon, cold and swift, carving through the mountains of Thrace. There was the Scamander, the sacred river of Troy, where heroes would one day bleed and die. And there was the Styx, the dark and terrible river that formed the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, a river so fearsome that even the gods themselves swore their most binding oaths upon its waters. But the sons were only half the story. Oceanus and Tethys also bore 3,000 daughters, the Oceanids, nymphs of unimaginable grace and beauty, each one a living embodiment of a spring, a fountain, a pond, a stream, a rain cloud drifting through the sky. They were everywhere and nowhere, dispersed across the world, serving the earth and the deep waters, keeping watch over the young, nurturing life wherever it took root. Some of these daughters would become legends in their own right. Metis, the personification of wisdom and cunning, would become Zeus's first wife, though she would meet a dark fate, swallowed whole by the king of the gods, only to give birth to Athena from within his skull. Europa, whose name would become synonymous with an entire continent, was an Oceanid. Styx, the eldest and most revered of all the Oceanids, was not merely a nymph, but a powerful goddess in her own right, the embodiment of hatred and unbreakable oaths, and she would stand beside Zeus during the great war to come. 6,000 children in total, 6,000 sources of fresh water scattered across the world, each one a thread in the vast tapestry of life that Oceanus and Tethys wove together. It was believed that the clouds themselves would swing low beneath the horizon at night to drink from Oceanus, gathering moisture before rising again to release their rains upon the thirsty earth. The ancient Greeks, when they looked out at the edge of the sea, when they saw the sun disappear into the waters, believed they were witnessing the boundary of Oceanus, the place where the known world ended and the realm of the gods began. And yet, for all his grandeur, Oceanus was marked by a quality that set him apart from his brothers: his neutrality, his refusal to engage in the endless violence that defined the age of the Titans. When the terrible act was committed, when the castration of Uranus took place, his brothers Hyperion, Cronus, and Iapetus held their father down at the four corners of the world, while Cronus, the youngest and most ambitious, swung the adamantine sickle that severed the sky from the earth. But Oceanus stood apart. He withdrew from the conflict, neither condemning nor condoning, simply refusing to raise his hand against his father. It was an act of defiance through inaction, a decision that would echo through the ages. And when Cronus rose to power and the age of the Titans began, Oceanus remained on the farthest edge of the world, dwelling in his great river, never leaving his home, not even to attend the assemblies of the gods on Mount Orthus. He was content to remain where he had always been, at the boundary, at the threshold, watching the sun rise and set, watching the stars wheel overhead, watching the endless flow of water that circled the world like a heartbeat. And then came the war, the Titanomachy, the great 10-year conflict between the Titans and the Olympians, between the old generation and the new, when Zeus, the youngest son of Cronus, rose up against his father, when he freed his siblings from the belly of the tyrant who had swallowed them whole, when he rallied the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires to his side and declared war upon the Titans, the cosmos itself trembled. Every god was forced to choose a side. Oceanus chose neither. Once again, he remained neutral, dwelling with Tethys on the far shores of his river, far from the battlefields where mountains cracked and the sky bled fire. Some stories even tell of Oceanus offering sanctuary to Hera, the wife of Zeus, sheltering her in his waters during the long years of war. It was an act of kindness, a gesture of peace in a world consumed by violence. And because of this neutrality, because of his refusal to stand against Zeus, Oceanus was spared the terrible fate that befell his brothers. When the Olympians won, when Zeus cast the rebel Titans into the pit of Tartarus, a void so deep, so dark, so far beneath the foundations of the world, that a bronze anvil dropped from the earth would fall for 9 days before striking the bottom. Oceanus was not among them. He was allowed to remain in his domain, still the god of the great river, still the source of all fresh water, still the boundary of the known world. His power was diminished, yes, for Poseidon, the new god of the sea, now ruled over the salt waters and the storms. But Oceanus remained. He had earned his survival through wisdom, through restraint, through the quiet strength of knowing when to fight and when to hold back. Honestly, which quality do you think is more important in leadership? The strength to act decisively, or the wisdom to know when not to act at all? For me, it has to be wisdom. History is filled with leaders who rushed into conflict only to destroy themselves and everyone around them. Oceanus, for all his power, chose survival through patience. That's a lesson worth remembering. But not all the Titans were so wise. Some sought knowledge, not power. Some sought to understand the universe rather than conquer it. Cronus, the Titan of intellect. of the inquisitive mind, of the question that burns in the darkness before the answer emerges into light. His name itself is ancient, drawn from a word that means query or to question, and in that single word lies the essence of everything he represented. Cronus was not a god of action but of thought, not a god of conquest but of contemplation. He was the cosmic mind, the origin of knowledge, the embodiment of rational inquiry and foresight. Where his brothers represented the physical structures of the world, light, rivers, constellations, Cronus represented something far more abstract, far more elusive. He was the celestial axis, the invisible pole around which the heavens turned, the fixed point in the sky around which all the stars revolved in their eternal dance. Imagine standing beneath a clear night sky, far from the lights of civilization, where the stars blaze in their full glory. As you watch, you notice that they do not simply hang there motionless. They move, slowly, imperceptibly, tracing great arcs across the dome of heaven. And if you watch long enough, you realize that they all seem to revolve around a single point, a place in the northern sky where the stars circle like water around a drain. The Greeks called this the celestial axis, the pole of heaven, and they believed that Cronus was the god who held that axis in place, the one who ensured that the stars followed their ordained paths, that the constellations did not drift into chaos, that the heavens remained ordered and predictable. But Cronus was more than just a cosmic landmark. He was the Titan of the north, associated with the northern pillar that held the sky away from the earth. Along with his three brothers, Hyperion in the east, Cronus in the south, and Iapetus in the west. Cronus represented one of the four great pillars that separated heaven and earth after the castration of Uranus. These four brothers, positioned at the cardinal points of the world, were the ones who held their father down during that terrible act, who pinned him in place while Cronus wielded the sickle. Caius, standing in the north, bore the weight of the sky upon his shoulders, and in doing so he became synonymous with stability, with structure, with the ordering of the cosmos. Cronus took as his wife his sister Phoebe, the Titaness of prophecy and the bright, radiant light of the moon. Together they formed a partnership of mind and foresight, intellect and divination. Some scholars believe that Cronus and Phoebe together may have functioned as the primal font of all knowledge in the universe, the source from which all wisdom and prophecy flowed. They had two daughters, both of whom would become far more famous than their father. The first was Leto, the gentle titaness of motherhood and womanly demure, who would become the mother of Apollo and Artemis by Zeus. The second was Asteria, the titaness of the stars and falling stars, who would transform herself into a quail and plunge into the sea to escape the advances of Zeus, becoming the island of Delos, where her sister Leto would one day give birth to the divine twins. Through his daughters, Cronus's legacy endured. Apollo, his grandson, inherited the gift of prophecy that ran through the family line. It was Apollo who would eventually take control of the Oracle of Delphi, which had once belonged to Phoebe, and it was Apollo who would become the god of knowledge, music, healing, and the sun itself. In this way, the intellect of Cronus, the foresight of Phoebe, lived on in the Olympian age, transformed but not forgotten. But like his brothers, Cronus would suffer for his participation in the overthrow of Uranus. When the Titanomachy came, when Zeus called upon the Titans to submit to the new order, Cronus stood with his brothers in defiance. He was a Titan, after all, one of the first gods, and the pride of the elder generation ran deep. For 10 long years the war raged. Mountains were hurled like stones, rivers boiled. The earth itself cracked and groaned under the weight of divine fury. The Cyclopes forged weapons of unimaginable power for the Olympians. Zeus received the thunderbolt, Poseidon, the trident, Hades, the helmet of invisibility. And the Hecatoncheires, those 100-handed giants who had been imprisoned for so long, rained down boulders upon the Titans like a storm of stone, 300 rocks falling with every heartbeat. In the end, the Titans fell, and Zeus, in his wrath, cast them into Tartarus, that terrible pit beneath the underworld, that place of suffering and eternal darkness where the sky dome and the walls of Tartarus met to form a great sphere that enclosed the entire cosmos. Hesiod described it as a void so deep, so far removed from the world of light, that if a bronze anvil were dropped from the earth, it would fall for 9 days before reaching the bottom. And there, in that lightless abyss, Cronus was imprisoned. Bound in chains, separated from his wife and daughters, cut off from the stars he had once watched over, Cronus endured. Some accounts say that he eventually went mad, driven to insanity by the isolation and the darkness, by the loss of everything he had known. Other accounts suggest that he was later released by Zeus along with the other Titans as an act of clemency. But the damage was done. The age of the Titans was over, and Cronus, the god of intellect, the embodiment of the questioning mind, faded into obscurity. And yet his legacy endures. Every time we look up at the night sky and see the stars wheeling around the celestial pole, we are witnessing the domain of Cronus. Every time we ask a question, every time we seek to understand the unknown, we are channeling the spirit of the Titan who represented the inquisitive mind. Cronus may have been imprisoned, may have been forgotten by most, but his influence remains, woven into the very fabric of the heavens. Now we turn to a Titan even more obscure, one whose name has been all but lost to time, yet whose role in the cosmic order was no less vital. Cronus, the keeper of the stars, the Titan of the heavenly constellations and the measure of the year. His name, which means ram, linked him directly to the constellation Aries, the celestial ram whose rising in the spring marked the beginning of the new year in the ancient Greek calendar. Cronus was the Titan of the south, the southern pillar that held the sky aloft, and like his brothers, he played a crucial role in the overthrow of Uranus. But beyond that, very little is known about him. He is one of the lesser-known Titans, a figure who dwells in the shadows of mythology, mentioned briefly by the ancient poets and then fading back into the darkness. What we do know is this: Cronus married Eurybia, a daughter of Gaia and Pontus, the primordial god of the sea. Eurybia was a goddess of strength and mastery, a divine being whose name meant wide force or wide ruling, and together with Cronus she bore 3 sons who would become far more famous than their father. The first was Astraeus, the Titan god of the stars and the winds, who married Eos, the goddess of the dawn, and together they produced the 4 great winds: Boreas the north wind, Zephyrus the west wind, Notus the south wind, and Eurus the east wind, as well as the stars of heaven and the morning star, Eos-Phoros. The second son was Pallas, the Titan of warcraft and battle, who would one day be defeated by Athena during the Titanomachy, and whose name would be taken by the goddess as a title. The third son was Perses, the Titan of destruction and the father of Hecate, the goddess of magic, crossroads, and the underworld. Through his sons, Cronus's legacy spread throughout the cosmos. The winds that blow across the earth, the stars that shine in the night sky, the destructive forces that tear down the old to make way for the new, all of these can be traced back to Cronus and his union with Eurybia. And yet, Cronus himself remains a mystery. The ancient poets rarely spoke of him. No temples were built in his honor. No prayers were offered to him. He was, in many ways, the forgotten Titan, the one who held up the southern sky and kept the constellations in their ordained places, but whose name faded into obscurity even as his descendants rose to prominence. Like his brothers, Cronus participated in the rebellion against Uranus, holding down the sky god in the south, while Cronus castrated him. And like his brothers, Cronus fought in the Titanomachy, standing against Zeus and the Olympians. And when the war was lost, Cronus was cast into Tartarus, imprisoned in that lightless abyss where the defeated Titans suffered in eternal darkness. Some accounts suggest that he was eventually released, but others claim that he remained there, bound in chains, a forgotten god in a forgotten place. In a way, Cronus represents something deeply unsettling about the nature of divinity in Greek mythology. The idea that even gods can be forgotten, that power and glory are fleeting, that the universe is vast and indifferent to the fates of individuals, no matter how mighty they once were. Creus held up the sky. He fathered gods who shaped the world, and yet his name is barely remembered. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? Even the gods are not immune to the passage of time. But now we turn to a titan who is anything but forgotten. Hyperion, the titan of primordial light, the source of all illumination before the sun itself existed. If Creus is the forgotten keeper of stars, then Hyperion is the blazing brilliance that refuses to be ignored. His name means he who walks on high, or he who watches from above, and it is a name that perfectly captures his essence. Hyperion was the light before light, the radiance before the sun was born, the watchful gaze that observed all things from the heights of heaven. He was the father of Helios, the sun god, Selene, the moon goddess, and Eos, the rosy-fingered dawn. He was the god who established the cycles of day and night, who ordered the movements of the celestial bodies, who brought structure to the passage of time itself. Imagine a world without the sun. Not a world of darkness, but a world of primordial light, a soft, diffuse glow that emanated from the heavens themselves, from the fabric of the sky, from the very air. This was the light of Hyperion, the light that existed before Helios began his daily journey across the sky. The ancient Greeks believed that Hyperion was the source of this light, the god who embodied watchfulness and wisdom, who saw all things from his elevated position in the east. He was the pillar of the east, the one who held up the sky where the sun would rise each morning, and his very presence ensured that the heavens remained bright and ordered. Hyperion married his sister Theia, the titaness of sight and the shining light of the ether, the clear blue sky that mortals gazed upon with wonder. Theia was radiant, perhaps the loveliest of all the titanesses, a goddess who imbued gold and silver and precious gems with their radiant shine, who spoke through the oracle at Iapetus in Thessaly. Together, Hyperion and Theia were the couple of light, the primordial luminaries who brought illumination to the cosmos, and from their union came the three great lights of heaven. First was Helios, the sun god, who would drive his golden chariot across the sky each day, pulled by 4 magnificent horses, bringing light and warmth to the world below. Helios was all-seeing, for his light reached every corner of the earth, and nothing could hide from his gaze. He was the one who witnessed the abduction of Persephone, who saw Aphrodite's affair with Ares, who knew all secrets because his light revealed all things. Helios was not merely the sun. He was the sun, a living god whose presence meant life and whose absence meant death. Second was Selene, the moon goddess, who rode across the night sky in a chariot pulled by white horses or winged bulls, her pale light a softer, gentler counterpart to her brother's blazing radiance. Selene was the goddess of the night, the watcher of dreams, the one who illuminated the darkness and made the world navigable even when the sun had set. She fell in love with the mortal Endymion, a shepherd of surpassing beauty, and she begged Zeus to grant him eternal sleep so that she could visit him each night without him aging or dying. And so Endymion sleeps still, somewhere on a mountaintop, eternally young, eternally dreaming, visited each night by the moon goddess who loves him. Third was Eos, the rosy-fingered dawn, the goddess who opened the gates of heaven each morning to allow her brother Helios to begin his journey. Eos was the herald of the day, the first light that touched the eastern horizon, the soft glow that preceded the sun's blazing arrival. She was also a goddess of insatiable desire, cursed by Aphrodite to forever crave mortal lovers, and she abducted many beautiful young men, carrying them away to her palace at the edge of the world where Oceanus met the sky. Among her lovers was Tithonus, a Trojan prince whom she begged Zeus to make immortal. Zeus granted her wish, but Eos forgot to ask for eternal youth as well, and so Tithonus aged and aged, growing smaller and more withered, until finally Eos, unable to bear his suffering, transformed him into a cicada, a creature whose song still greets the dawn each morning. Through these three children, Hyperion's legacy blazed across the heavens: the sun, the moon, and the dawn. These were the lights that ordered the world, that made time measurable, that brought warmth and hope and beauty to the cosmos. And Hyperion, the father of these lights, stood in the east as the pillar that held the sky aloft, ensuring that his children could continue their eternal journeys. Like his brothers, Hyperion participated in the castration of Uranus, holding down the sky, god in the east, while Cronus wielded the sickle. And like his brothers, Hyperion fought in the Titanomachy, standing against Zeus and the Olympians. The war was brutal, a decade of unrelenting violence. And when it ended, Hyperion was cast into Tartarus, imprisoned in that terrible pit beneath the foundations of the world. Hesiod tells us that Tartarus is a place where earth, sea, and sky all have their roots, a void that lies beneath everything, and it is there that Hyperion was confined, separated from his children, from the light he had once embodied, condemned to dwell in eternal darkness. Some accounts say that he was eventually released by Zeus, allowed to return to the world of light, but by then the age of the Titans was over. His children continued their journeys across the sky, but Hyperion himself faded into myth, remembered only as the father of the lights of heaven, the god who once watched from above. And yet, every sunrise is a testament to Hyperion. Every dawn that breaks across the eastern horizon, every ray of sunlight that pierces the darkness, carries with it the legacy of the Titan who was the light before the sun existed. Hyperion may have fallen, may have been imprisoned, but his children ensure that his light will never be extinguished. Now we come to Iapetus, the Titan of mortality, the god who represented the cycle of life and death, the inevitability of endings. His name is thought to mean the piercer, or he who wounds, a fitting title for the god who embodied the mortal lifespan, the one who reminded even the gods that all things, even divine things, must eventually come to an end. Iapetus was the western pillar, the one who held up the sky in the west where the sun set each evening, where the light died and darkness crept across the world. He was the ancestor of humanity, the father of the Titans who would shape the fate of mortal men in ways both tragic and profound. Iapetus married Clymene, an Oceanid, one of the 3,000 daughters of Oceanus and Tethys. Some sources say he married Asia, another Oceanid, but the most common tradition names Clymene as his wife. Together they had 4 sons, and each of those sons would become legendary in his own right. The first was Atlas, the strongest of the Titans, who would one day be condemned by Zeus to hold up the sky itself, bearing the weight of the heavens on his shoulders for all eternity as punishment for leading the Titans in their war against the Olympians. Atlas is often depicted as a figure of tragic endurance, a god who carries the burden of the cosmos, who can never rest, who must stand at the edge of the world forever, holding up the sky so that it does not crash down upon the earth. The second son was Prometheus, the Titan whose name means forethought, or he who thinks ahead. Prometheus was the cleverest of all the Titans, a god of cunning and intellect who loved humanity more than he loved the gods. It was Prometheus who stole fire from the heavens and gave it to mortal men, defying Zeus and forever altering the course of human history. For this crime, Zeus had him chained to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, where an eagle would come each day to devour his liver, and each night the liver would grow back, condemning Prometheus to an eternity of suffering. And yet, even in his torment, Prometheus remained defiant, refusing to submit to Zeus, refusing to reveal the prophecy that would one day lead to the king of the gods' downfall. The third son was Epimetheus, whose name means afterthought, or he who thinks too late. Epimetheus was the opposite of his brother Prometheus, impulsive, careless, always acting before thinking. It was Epimetheus who accepted the gift of Pandora from Zeus, the first woman, who came with a jar often mistranslated as a box that contained all the evils of the world. Despite Prometheus's warnings never to accept gifts from Zeus, Epimetheus was enchanted by Pandora's beauty, and he married her. And when she opened the jar, all the evils, disease, death, envy, suffering flew out into the world, and only hope remained inside, trapped at the bottom. Epimetheus, in his foolishness, doomed humanity to a life of suffering, and yet he was never punished as harshly as his brothers. Perhaps the gods saw his actions as the result of stupidity rather than defiance, and so they let him live. The fourth son was Oceanus, the titan of violent anger and rash action. Oceanus fought in the Titanomachy on the side of the Titans, and he was known for his hubris and impetuous nature. During the war, Zeus struck him down with a thunderbolt, and unlike the other Titans, Oceanus was not merely imprisoned, he was utterly destroyed, his body incinerated, and his soul cast into Erebus, the realm of darkness. He became the first casualty of Zeus's wrath, a warning to all who would dare to oppose the king of the gods. Through these four sons, Iapetus left a legacy that would shape the relationship between gods and mortals forever. Atlas bore the weight of the heavens, Prometheus gave humanity fire and paid the price for his compassion. Epimetheus brought suffering into the world through his foolishness, and Oceanus became a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride and rash action. Each son inherited a different aspect of mortality from their father: perseverance, foresight, foolishness, and wrath. And each of these qualities would define the human condition in ways both beautiful and tragic. Iapetus himself fought in the Titanomachy, standing with his brothers against Zeus and the Olympians. And when the war was lost, Iapetus was cast into Tartarus, imprisoned in that lightless void beneath the world. Homer tells us that Iapetus and Cronus were both held in Tartarus, suffering in the darkness, far from the light of the sun, far from the world they had once ruled. Some accounts say that Iapetus was eventually released, but by then his sons had become far more famous than he ever was. Atlas still holds up the sky. Prometheus is remembered as the benefactor of mankind. Epimetheus and Pandora's story is told and retold. But Iapetus, the father of them all, faded into obscurity, remembered only as the ancestor of the rebels and the ancestor of men. And now we come to the youngest, the most famous, the most feared, the Titan who would become a king, a tyrant, a father who devoured his own children, and the god whose fall would shake the heavens and the earth. Cronus, the king of the Titans, the god of destructive, all-devouring time. His story is not one of wisdom or restraint, but of ambition, fear, and the terrible inevitability of fate. Cronus represents the ultimate paradox of power. The stronger you grasp it, the more certain you are to lose it. Cronus was the youngest of the 12 Titans, the last-born son of Uranus and Gaia, and yet he was the most cunning, the most ambitious, the one who dared to do what his older brothers would not. When Gaia, suffering under the cruelty of Uranus, called upon her children to rebel, to free the imprisoned Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires, only Cronus stepped forward. He was not the eldest, he was not the strongest, but he was the one willing to commit the unthinkable. Gaia gave him an adamantine sickle, a blade forged from the hardest substance in the cosmos, and she hid him in a place of ambush. And when Uranus descended to lie with Gaia, spreading himself across the earth in an act of cosmic union, Cronus struck. He reached out with his left hand and seized his father's genitals, and with his right hand he swung the sickle and severed them, casting them behind him into the sea. The blood of Uranus fell upon the earth, and from that blood sprang the Furies, the avenging spirits of vengeance, and the giants, the monstrous children of violence. The severed genitals fell into the sea, and from the foam that gathered around them, Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, was born, rising from the waves fully formed, radiant and terrible. The act of castration was not merely an act of violence, it was an act of cosmic separation. By severing Uranus's procreative power, Cronus ended his father's reign and brought about the final separation of sky and earth. No longer would Uranus descend to embrace Gaia. No longer would the two primordial beings create new life. The age of Uranus was over, and the age of Cronus had begun. As he departed, Uranus uttered a prophecy, a curse that would haunt Cronus for the rest of his reign. "You have overthrown me, but know this, one day your own children will do the same to you." Cronus, drunk on his victory, dismissed the prophecy. He took his sister Rhea as his wife, and together they ruled over the Titans from Mount Orthes. And for a time it was a golden age. Gaia, freed from her suffering, produced crops and fruits in abundance. Mortals lived carefree lives, unburdened by toil or hardship. The world was peaceful, prosperous, and the gods walked among men without fear. Cronus, it seemed, had ushered in a paradise. But the prophecy gnawed at him. Every time Rhea gave birth, every time a new child entered the world, Cronus felt the shadow of his father's curse looming over him. He could not ignore it. He could not escape it. And so he made a decision that would define his reign and doom him to infamy. He decided to swallow his children. One by one, as Rhea gave birth, Cronus would take the newborn child and devour it whole, imprisoning it in his stomach where it could never grow, never challenge him, never fulfill the prophecy. First came Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, swallowed. Then Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, swallowed. Then Hera, the queen of the gods, swallowed. Then Hades, the lord of the underworld, swallowed. Then Poseidon, the god of the sea, swallowed. 5 children, all imprisoned in the belly of their father, alive but unable to escape. Rhea was devastated. She had endured the pain of childbirth 5 times, only to watch her husband devour each child moments after they were born. When she became pregnant with her 6th child, she knew she could not let it happen again. She went to Gaia, her mother, and together they devised a plan. When the time came for the child to be born, Rhea travelled to the island of Crete, to a hidden cave on Mount Dicta, and there she gave birth to Zeus. She left the infant in the care of nymphs and returned to Cronus, carrying a large stone wrapped in swaddling clothes. Cronus, suspecting nothing, took the bundle and swallowed it whole. The stone sank into his stomach, joining his 5 children, and Cronus believed he had once again avoided his fate. But Zeus was growing up in secret, hidden away in Crete, nursed by the nymphs, guarded by the curettes who clashed their spears against their shields to drown out his cries. And when he came of age, when he became strong and cunning and ready, he returned. He sought out Metis, the Oceanid of wisdom and cunning, and together they prepared a potion, a mixture of wine and mustard, a vomit-inducing concoction. Zeus, disguised as a cupbearer, offered the drink to Cronus, who drank deeply, unsuspecting. And then, in a moment of horrifying reversal, Cronus began to vomit. First came the stone, the one he had swallowed in place of Zeus. Then came Poseidon, then Hades, then Hera, then Demeter, then Hestia. All 5 siblings, fully grown, emerged from their father's stomach, alive and furious. Zeus rallied his siblings. He freed the Cyclopes from Tartarus, and in gratitude they forged weapons of unimaginable power. The thunderbolt for Zeus, the trident for Poseidon, the helmet of invisibility for Hades. He freed the Hecatoncheires, the 100-handed giants who rained boulders upon the Titans like a storm of stone. And then Zeus declared war. The Titanomachy had begun. For 10 years the cosmos trembled. Mountains were hurled like pebbles, rivers boiled and dried up, the earth cracked and split, the sky bled fire. Zeus hurled his thunderbolts, incinerating everything in their path. Poseidon struck the earth with his trident, causing earthquakes and tidal waves. The Hecatoncheires hurled 300 boulders at once, an unstoppable barrage. And the Titans, led by Cronus, fought back with all their might. But it was not enough. The Olympians had the advantage of weapons forged by the Cyclopes, the strength of the hecatoncheires, and the fury of gods who had been imprisoned and betrayed. One by one the Titans fell, and when the war was over, Zeus cast them into Tartarus, into that lightless abyss beneath the world, and set the hecatoncheires as their guards. Cronus, the once mighty king, was imprisoned with his brothers. The prophecy had come true. He had been overthrown by his own son, just as he had overthrown his father. And in the dark depths of Tartarus, Cronus had all eternity to reflect on the choices that had led him there. He had castrated his father out of ambition. He had devoured his children out of fear. And in the end, both ambition and fear had destroyed him. Some accounts say that Zeus eventually released Cronus and the other Titans, allowing them to dwell in the Isles of the Blessed, a paradise where the souls of heroes rested. Other accounts say that Cronus remains in Tartarus still, bound in chains, a prisoner of his own paranoia. Cronus is, in many ways, the ultimate tragic figure of Greek mythology, a god who achieved ultimate power only to lose it because he could not escape his fear. He represents destructive time, the time that devours all things, the time that turns youth into age, strength into weakness, glory into dust. He is a reminder that power, no matter how great, is fleeting, and that fear, left unchecked, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so we have walked through the lives of the 6 male Titans, the gods before the gods, the pillars upon which the cosmos rested. Oceanus, the eldest, the boundary of the world, who chose peace over war and survived because of it. Cronus, the cosmic mind, the keeper of the celestial axis, who sought knowledge and was imprisoned for his loyalty to the old order. Creus, the forgotten keeper of stars, the southern pillar, whose legacy lived on in his sons even as his own name faded into obscurity. Hyperion, the source of primordial light, the father of the sun, moon, and dawn, who blazed with radiance and was cast into darkness. Iapetus, the titan of mortality, the western pillar, whose sons shaped the fate of humanity in ways both tragic and profound. And Cronus, the youngest, the most ambitious, the king who ruled through fear and was destroyed by it. These were the Titans. They were flawed, violent, magnificent, and tragic. They held up the sky. They ordered the cosmos. They gave birth to the gods we know, the Olympians who would rule in their place. And yet, the Titans are not entirely gone. They linger in the stories we tell, in the cycles of time, in the stars that wheel overhead, in the rivers that flow through the world, in the light of the sun and the moon. They are the foundation upon which everything was built, the ancient gods who shaped the universe and then were cast down into darkness. But their story is not over, for every ending is also a beginning, and the fall of the Titans was the rise of the Olympians. The world changed, but the memory of what came before endures. And as long as we look up at the stars, as long as we feel the weight of time pressing upon us, as long as we ask questions and seek knowledge, the Titans will never truly be forgotten. Thank you for joining me tonight, dreamers. Until next time, may your dreams be filled with wonder, and may you always remember, even the gods can fall, but their stories live on forever. But the suns were not the only gods born from the union of sky and earth. For every sun there was a sister, a daughter, a goddess who held her own dominion over the cosmos, who shaped the world with her own power and wisdom. These were the Titanides, the female Titans, and they were no less magnificent, no less essential to the ordering of creation than their brothers. If the male Titans were the pillars that held up the sky, then the female Titans were the weavers who threaded together the fabric of existence itself, the nurses who nourished life, the voices who spoke the laws of the universe into being. And we must not make the mistake of thinking they were simply consorts or mothers, appendages to the stories of their husbands and sons. No, these were goddesses of immense power in their own right, deities whose influence shaped the very foundations of reality, whose gifts to the world were so profound that without them there would be no culture, no justice, no memory, no light. Let us begin with Theia, the shimmer of the cosmos itself, the goddess whose very essence was radiance. Theia, whose name means divine or goddess, was the Titaness of sight, of vision, of the shining light that fills the clear blue sky and makes the world visible to mortal eyes. But more than this, she was the goddess who endowed gold and silver and precious gems with their brilliance, who gave them their intrinsic value, who made them shimmer and gleam with an inner light that spoke of something divine. The ancient Greeks believed that when you looked upon gold, when you held a piece of silver in your hand, when you gazed at a gem catching the light, you were witnessing the power of Theia made manifest in the material world. She was the reason these metals and stones were precious, the reason they were worthy of kings and gods, the reason they carried within them a hint of the divine radiance that filled the heavens. Picture Theia as she might have appeared in those ancient days before the Olympians rose to power, a goddess of such luminous beauty that to look directly at her was to be momentarily blinded, as if you had stared too long at the sun. Her hair flowed like liquid gold, catching and reflecting every ray of light that touched it, and her skin seemed to glow from within, as if she carried the very essence of illumination beneath her flesh. Her eyes. Her eyes were said to be the most remarkable thing about her, for they were the source of all sight, the origin of vision itself. The Greeks believed that sight worked not by light entering the eyes, but by beams of light projecting outward from the eyes to touch and perceive the world. And Theia, as the goddess of sight, was the one who made this possible. Her eyes emitted beams of pure radiance, and it was through her divine gift that mortals and gods alike could see the world around them, could perceive color and shape and distance, could navigate through the cosmos without stumbling blind. Theia was also known by another name, Iapetus, which means wide-shining or far-shining. This epithet spoke to her dominion over the upper atmosphere, the brilliant expanse of the clear blue sky that stretches above the earth like a dome of crystalline light. When you look up on a cloudless day and see that endless azure vault, when the air seems to shimmer with an almost tangible brightness, you are looking at the realm of Theia. She was the goddess who filled that space with light, who kept the darkness at bay, who ensured that the world remained visible and navigable. In this way, she was connected to the primordial deity Ether, who represented the pure upper air, the bright atmosphere of the heavens where the gods dwelt. Some scholars believe that Theia may have even replaced Ether in certain traditions, taking on his role as the personification of the shimmering sky. Theia took as her husband her brother Hyperion, the Titan of primordial light, the one who watched from above, the one who would become the father of the celestial luminaries. It was a perfect union, a marriage of light to light, of radiance to brilliance, of the shimmering sky to the all-seeing eye. Together, Theia and Hyperion represented the totality of illumination in the cosmos, not just the physical light that allows us to see, but the metaphorical light of wisdom, of watchfulness, of the clarity that comes from understanding. They were, in many ways, the original enlightened beings, the gods who first brought the concept of illumination, both literal and figurative, into the world. From their union came 3 children, and each of these children would become one of the most important celestial deities in the entire Greek pantheon. First was Helios, the sun god, who would drive his golden chariot across the sky each day, bringing warmth and light to the world below. Helios inherited from his father the role of the watchful one, the all-seeing god whose light reached every corner of the earth. And from his mother he inherited the radiance that made him so blindingly brilliant that no mortal could look upon his true form without being consumed by fire. Helios was not merely a symbol of the sun, he was the sun, a living god whose presence meant life and whose absence meant death. Second came Selene, the moon goddess, who rode across the night sky in her chariot pulled by white horses, her pale light a gentler echo of her brother's blazing radiance. Selene inherited from Thea the gift of luminosity, the ability to shine even in darkness, to cast a soft glow that illuminated the world without burning it. The moonlight, that silvery shimmer that transforms the night into a realm of mystery and beauty, was Selene's gift to the world, and it came from Thea's essence, from the goddess who made precious metals gleam with an inner light. Third came Eos, the rosy-fingered dawn, the goddess who opened the gates of heaven each morning to allow her brother Helios to begin his journey across the sky. Eos was the first light of day, the soft glow that appears on the eastern horizon before the sun rises, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold and crimson. She inherited from her mother the gift of radiance, the ability to transform darkness into light, to announce the coming of a new day with her gentle, gradually intensifying glow. Eos was a goddess of beginnings, of fresh starts, of the hope that comes with each sunrise, and all of this came from Thea, the goddess who first taught the world what it meant to shimmer, to shine, to glow with divine light. Through her children, Thea's influence spread across the entire cosmos, the sun, the moon, and the dawn. These were the three great lights of heaven, the celestial bodies that ordered time, that marked the passage of days and nights, that made life on earth possible. And all of them owed their radiance to Thea, the goddess of sight and light, the one who endowed them with their brilliance. It was said that Thea lived with Helios in his palace in the east, where the sun rises each morning, and that she watched over her son as he prepared for his daily journey across the sky, ensuring that his light remained pure and bright and unwavering. But Thea's role in the Titanomachy, the great war between the Titans and the Olympians, remains somewhat obscure. Like many of the female Titans, she did not take an active role in the fighting. The ancient texts do not speak of her wielding weapons or leading armies into battle. Instead, she seems to have remained neutral, neither supporting Zeus nor standing against him. Perhaps, like her husband Hyperion, she was eventually cast into Tartarus when the war ended and Zeus punished those who had opposed him. Or perhaps, like Oceanus and Tethys, she was spared because she had not actively fought against the new order. The sources do not tell us her fate, and so she fades from the stories, her light dimming as the age of the Titans came to an end. Yet Thea's legacy endured. Every time the sun rose in the morning, every time the moon appeared in the night sky, every time the dawn painted the horizon with her rosy fingers, mortals were reminded of Thea, the goddess who first brought radiance into the world. Every time a jeweler held up a gem to the light and marveled at its brilliance, every time a goldsmith crafted a ring or a necklace and watched the metal gleam with inner fire, they were witnessing Thea's gift. She was the goddess who taught the world to see, to perceive, to value beauty and light and the shimmering wonder of existence itself. And though her name faded from the prayers of mortals, though temples were not built in her honor and poets rarely sang of her deeds, her presence remained, woven into the very fabric of the visible world, as essential and eternal as light itself. Now we turn to Rhea, the great mother, the queen of the Titans, the goddess whose story is one of both terrible suffering and cunning triumph. Rhea, whose name means flow or ease, was the titaness of fertility, of motherhood, of the eternal cycle of generation and renewal. She represented the flowing of time, the flowing of menstrual blood and birth waters, the flowing of milk from the breast of a nursing mother. She was, in many ways, the embodiment of the feminine principle of creation, the goddess who brought new life into the world, who nurtured and protected her children, who ensured that the cycle of existence continued unbroken. Her name appeared in the common Homeric phrase describing the gods as those who live at ease, a reminder that comfort, peace, and the natural flow of existence were all under Rhea's domain. Rhea was one of the 12 original Titans, a daughter of Uranus and Gaia, born when the universe was still young, and the earth was learning how to shape itself into mountains and valleys and oceans. She grew up in a world ruled by her father, the sky, who feared his own children so much that he imprisoned them, keeping them locked away so they could never challenge his power. But when Cronus, the youngest of the Titans, rose up and castrated Uranus, severing the connection between sky and earth, Rhea was freed along with her siblings. And when Cronus took the throne and became the king of the Titans, it was Rhea he chose as his queen, Rhea he took as his consort, Rhea who would bear his children and rule beside him during the golden age of Titan rule. Imagine Rhea in those early days of her marriage to Cronus, young and beautiful and filled with hope for the future. She was a goddess of fertility after all, and she looked forward to bearing children, to filling the world with new life, to watching her offspring grow and flourish. She wore a turret crown, a symbol of her status as Queen of the Heavens, and her presence was said to be both majestic and comforting, like a mother's embrace. She was often depicted with lions at her side, for she was closely associated with the wild power of nature, with the fierce protective instinct of a mother defending her young. In later times, Rhea would become so closely identified with the Anatolian mother goddess Cybele that the two were often conflated, both seen as representations of the great maternal force that sustains all life. But Rhea's story would not be one of simple joy and fulfillment, for Cronus, despite his victory over Uranus, could not escape the shadow of his father's curse. Uranus had warned him, "You have overthrown me, but one day your own children will do the same to you." And Cronus, haunted by this prophecy, lived in a state of constant fear and paranoia. He had seen what happened when a son rose against his father. He had been that son, and he was determined that history would not repeat itself, that no child of his would ever have the chance to challenge his rule. And so, when Rhea gave birth to their first child, Cronus made a decision that would define his entire reign. He took the newborn infant, Hestia, the goddess of the hearth and home, and he swallowed her whole. Rhea watched in horror as her husband opened his mouth impossibly wide and consumed their daughter, imprisoning her in the darkness of his belly. She begged him to stop, to reconsider, to show mercy. But Cronus was unmoved. "It is necessary," he told her. "It is the only way to keep my power secure." And so Rhea was forced to endure the unthinkable, to give birth again and again, only to watch Cronus devour each child moments after it entered the world. Second came Demeter, the goddess of the harvest and the fertility of the earth, swallowed. Third came Hera, who would one day be the queen of the Olympian gods, the goddess of marriage and family, swallowed. Fourth came Hades, the future lord of the underworld, the god of the dead, swallowed. Fifth came Poseidon, the future god of the sea, the earth shaker, the lord of storms, swallowed. 5 children, 5 gods and goddesses, all imprisoned in the belly of their father, alive but unable to grow, unable to escape, trapped in an eternal darkness. And Rhea, the great mother, the goddess of fertility and nurturing, was left with empty arms and a broken heart. The pain she must have felt is almost impossible to comprehend. She was a goddess of motherhood, and yet she had never been allowed to mother her children, never been allowed to hold them, to nurse them, to watch them take their first steps or speak their first words. Every instinct in her divine nature cried out against what was happening, and yet she was powerless to stop it. Cronus was the king of the Titans, the most powerful god in the cosmos, and she could not defy him, could not fight him, could not even persuade him to change his mind. The only thing she could do was endure and hope and wait for the moment when something would change. That moment came when she became pregnant with her 6th child. By this time, Rhea had reached the limits of her endurance. She would not allow Cronus to swallow another of her children. And so she went to her mother, Gaia, the primordial earth, the one who had helped orchestrate the overthrow of Uranus, the one who had given Cronus the sickle that allowed him to castrate the sky. Gaia listened to her daughter's anguish, and together they devised a plan, a deception. a trick that would save at least one of Rhea's children and set in motion the events that would eventually bring down Cronus and end the age of the Titans. When the time came for the sixth child to be born, Rhea did not return to Mount Orthes where Cronus held his court. Instead, she travelled in secret to the island of Crete, to a hidden cave on Mount Dicta, far from the eyes of her husband. And there, in the darkness and solitude of that cave, surrounded by the ancient power of the earth itself, Rhea gave birth to Zeus. She held him for the first time, this child who would one day become the king of the gods, the wielder of the thunderbolt, the defeater of Titans. She must have looked into his infant eyes and seen something there, a strength, a destiny, a promise of the future. And she knew that she had to protect him, that she had to keep him hidden, that this child was the key to ending Cronus's tyranny. Rhea left the infant Zeus in the care of nymphs Adrasteia and Ide, the daughters of Melicius. She entrusted them with the most precious thing she had, her only surviving child, and she begged them to keep him safe, to raise him in secret, to ensure that Cronus never learned of his existence. The nymphs agreed, and they nursed Zeus with the milk of the magical goat Amalthea, whose horn would later become the cornucopia, the horn of plenty. And to ensure that Zeus's cries would not be heard by Cronus, Rhea enlisted the help of the Curettes, a group of armoured warriors who would dance and clash their shields and spears together whenever the infant cried, creating such a din that no sound from the cave could escape into the wider world. But Rhea still had to return to Cronus, still had to face her husband, still had to convince him that she had given birth and that he needed to perform his terrible ritual once more. And so she took a large stone, roughly the size and weight of a newborn infant, and she wrapped it in swaddling clothes, bundling it so carefully that its true nature was hidden. She returned to Mount Orthes, her face a mask of resignation, and she presented the bundle to Cronus. "Here is your child," she told him, her voice empty of emotion. "Do what you must." Cronus, suspecting nothing, took the bundle from her hands. He did not look closely at it, did not unwrap it to see what he was about to consume. He simply opened his mouth and swallowed it whole, as he had done 5 times before. The stone, later known as the Omphalos stone, sank down into his stomach, joining the 5 gods and goddesses already imprisoned there. And Cronus, satisfied that he had once again averted the prophecy, returned to his throne, secure in the belief that his power was safe. But Rhea knew the truth. Zeus was alive. Zeus was growing. Zeus was being raised in secret, learning his strength, preparing for the day when he would return and challenge his father. And Rhea, who had endured so much suffering, who had lost so much, finally had hope. She had deceived Cronus. She had saved her child. She had set in motion the chain of events that would eventually lead to the Titanomachy, to the fall of the Titans, to the rise of the Olympians. In this single act of maternal cunning and courage, Rhea changed the course of cosmic history. Years passed, and Zeus grew to maturity in his cave on Crete, and when he was finally ready, when he had become strong enough and wise enough, he returned. With the help of Metis, the Oceanid of cunning, he prepared a potion, a mixture of wine and mustard that would induce vomiting. Zeus disguised himself as a cupbearer and offered the drink to Cronus. The king of the Titans, unsuspecting, drank deeply. And then his body convulsed, and he began to vomit. First came the stone, the one Rhea had given him in place of Zeus. Then came Poseidon, fully grown, emerging from his father's mouth. Then Hades. Then Hera, then Demeter, then Hestia, all 5 of Rhea's other children, all the gods and goddesses who had been imprisoned for so long, were freed in a matter of moments, and they were furious. Rhea's role in the Titanomachy that followed is not well documented in the ancient sources, but her allegiance was clear. She stood with Zeus, with her children, with the new generation that would overthrow the old. She had suffered too much under Cronus's rule to support him now, and she must have felt a fierce joy as she watched her children finally claim their freedom, finally rise up against the tyrant who had denied them life. When the war ended, when Zeus cast Cronus and the rebel Titans into Tartarus, Rhea was spared. She was honored as the Great Mother, the one who had saved Zeus, the one whose cunning had made the victory of the Olympians possible. In the new order established by Zeus, Rhea held a place of honor. She was revered as the mother of the gods, the matriarch of the divine family. In later traditions, especially those that conflated her with Cybele, Rhea was worshipped as a goddess of wild nature, of mountains and forests, of the untamed power of the earth. She was often depicted riding in a chariot pulled by lions, her turret crown upon her head, a symbol of both her queenly status and her connection to the earth itself. She represented the eternal cycle of life, birth, growth, death, and rebirth, the endless flow of generations that ensured the continuation of existence. Honestly, which do you think requires more strength, the ability to endure suffering in silence or the courage to resist and fight back? For me, it has to be the courage to resist. Rhea endured for so long, watching her children be taken from her again and again, but in the end, it was her decision to act, to deceive Cronus, to save Zeus, that changed everything. Endurance is a kind of strength, yes, but action, especially when it's dangerous and uncertain, requires something even greater. Rhea's story is a reminder that even in the darkest moments, even when all seems lost, a single act of defiance can alter the course of history. And with that thought, we turn now to another Titaness, one whose very existence ensured that order, law, and justice would be woven into the fabric of the cosmos. Themis. Even her name carries weight. It means divine law, custom, that which is put in place. Themis was the Titaness of divine justice, of order, of the natural laws that govern both gods and mortals. She was not the goddess of human laws, the rules and regulations that societies create and enforce. No, she represented something far more fundamental, far more ancient. She was the embodiment of Themis, the unwritten rules of conduct, the sense of right and wrong that exists before any society codifies it, the moral order that underlies all of creation. She was justice, not as a human concept, but as a cosmic force, as inevitable and eternal as the rising of the sun. Imagine Themis as she appeared in the ancient world, a figure of stern beauty and unshakable authority. She was often depicted blindfolded, a symbol of her impartiality, her refusal to favor one party over another based on wealth or status or personal connection. In her hands she carried the scales of justice, perfectly balanced, measuring out what was due with absolute precision. And sometimes she carried a sword, a reminder that justice, when necessary, must be enforced, that there are consequences for those who violate the natural order. Themis was not a gentle goddess. She was fair, yes, but fairness does not always mean kindness. Sometimes justice demands harsh measures, and Themis never flinched from that responsibility. Themis was one of the 12 Titans, a daughter of Uranus and Gaia, born into a cosmos that desperately needed the concept she represented. In the earliest days of creation, there was chaos and violence and the constant threat of disorder. Uranus ruled with cruelty, imprisoning his own children. Cronus overthrew him through violence and then devoured his offspring out of fear. The cosmos was a place of primal power struggles, where might made right and there were no rules to protect the weak or restrain the strong. Into this world came Themis, the goddess who insisted that there must be order, that there must be rules, that even the gods themselves must be bound by certain principles. Themis presided over the assemblies of the gods, the gatherings where decisions were made and disputes were settled. It was she who called these assemblies into being, who established the protocols for how they should be conducted, who ensured that everyone had a chance to speak and be heard. She was the goddess of hospitality, ensuring that guests were treated with respect and that hosts fulfilled their obligations. She was the goddess of oaths, making certain that promises once made were kept, that vows were sacred and binding. In all of these roles, Themis represented the fundamental idea that society, whether divine or mortal, requires structure, requires rules, requires a shared understanding of right and wrong in order to function. But Themis was also a prophetic goddess, gifted with the ability to see the future and understand the workings of fate. She presided over the Oracle of Delphi before it was given to Apollo, and in that role she spoke with the divine voice, the mists, that first instructed mankind in the laws of justice and morality. It was Themis who taught humans about piety, about how to properly honor the gods. It was Themis who established the rules of hospitality, the sacred obligation to welcome strangers and treat them well. It was Themis who explained the importance of good governance, of conducting assemblies in an orderly fashion, of making decisions through discussion and consensus rather than violence and coercion. When Zeus rose to power after the Titanomachy, he recognized the value of what Themis represented. He needed help establishing a new order, a better order, one that would not simply repeat the mistakes of Uranus and Cronus. And so Zeus took Themis as his second wife, after Meti and before Hera. This was not merely a romantic union, it was a political and cosmic necessity. Zeus, the god of power, needed Themis, the goddess of law, in order to transform his rule from simple tyranny into something more stable, more just, more enduring. Through his marriage to Themis, Zeus learned how to be not just a conqueror, but a king. She sat beside his throne, advising him on matters of divine law, reminding him of the rules that even he must follow, ensuring that his rule would be characterized by order rather than chaos. From their union came children who would become personifications of the very concepts Themis embodied. First came the Horai, the hours or seasons, Eunomia, good order, Dike, justice, and Irene, peace. These three goddesses represented the natural order of the world, the way things should be when justice and law are properly maintained. Eunomia ensured that societies functioned smoothly, that there was harmony and proper governance. Dike was the personification of moral justice, the force that ensured wrongdoers were punished and the innocent were protected. And Irene represented the peace that comes when order and justice prevail, when disputes are resolved fairly and violence is no longer necessary. But Themis also bore another set of daughters, perhaps even more significant, the Moirai, the Fates, Clotho, who spun the thread of life, Lachesis, who measured it out, and Atropos, who cut it, bringing each life to its appointed end. The Moirai were the ultimate expression of cosmic law, for they represented the one rule that no one, not even Zeus himself, could break, that every life has its measure, that every story has its ending, that time moves inexorably forward and what is fated must come to pass. Through these daughters, Themis ensured that even the gods were subject to fate, that there was an order higher than individual will, higher even than the power of the king of the gods. Some sources also claim that Themis was the mother of the Titan Prometheus, the one who gave fire to humanity and was punished for his defiance. If this is true, and the genealogies of Greek mythology are often contradictory, it would add another layer to Themis's story. For Prometheus represented a different kind of justice, a more rebellious kind, one that challenged the established order in the name of compassion for mortals. Perhaps it was from Themis that Prometheus inherited his sense of what was right, his willingness to stand up for justice even when it meant defying Zeus himself. Themis played a crucial role in several key moments of Greek mythology. It was she who warned Zeus about the prophecy concerning Metis, that if Metis bore a son, that son would overthrow Zeus, just as Zeus had overthrown Cronus. This warning led Zeus to swallow Metis, preventing the prophecy from coming true, though it resulted in the birth of Athena from Zeus's head. Themis also warned Zeus about the danger posed by Thetis, the sea nymph whom both Zeus and Poseidon desired. Themis revealed that any son born to Thetis would be greater than his father, and so Zeus arranged for Thetis to marry the mortal Peleus instead, resulting in the birth of Achilles, the greatest of the Greek heroes. In both of these instances, Themis served as the voice of cosmic wisdom. the one who understood the deeper patterns of fate and could advise Zeus on how to navigate them. She was not simply a goddess of rules and regulations, she was a goddess of understanding, of seeing the consequences of actions, of recognizing that every decision has ripples that spread out through time and space. In this way, Themis represented a kind of divine foresight, the ability to think beyond the immediate moment and consider the long-term implications of one's choices. During the Titanomachy, Themis's loyalty lay with Zeus and the Olympians, despite being a Titan herself. She understood that the old order under Cronus had become corrupt, that it was time for a change, that the natural progression of cosmic history demanded that the younger generation take power. And so she sided with Zeus, providing him with counsel and support, helping him establish the new order that would replace the Titan rule. For this loyalty, she was honored in the age of the Olympians, allowed to retain her authority and her position as the personification of divine law. Themis was often paired with Nemesis, the goddess of retribution, who punished those who violated the natural order. Together they shared a temple at Rhamnus, and their partnership symbolized the two sides of justice. Themis established the rules, and Nemesis enforced them. Unlike Nemesis, however, Themis was not a wrathful goddess. She did not take pleasure in punishment or revenge. She simply maintained the balance, ensured that the scales remained level, reminded everyone, mortal and divine alike, that there were consequences for breaking the cosmic laws. In artwork and literature, Themis was one of the most recognizable deities, precisely because she represented such a fundamental concept. Judges in ancient Greece were often called Themistopoloi, which means servants of Themis, a recognition that their role was not to create justice out of nothing, but to interpret and apply the divine law that Themis had established. Her image, the blindfolded woman with scales and sword, became the universal symbol of justice, one that endures even today in courtrooms around the world. When we speak of blind justice, of fairness and impartiality, we are invoking the spirit of Themis, whether we know it or not. And yet, for all her importance, Themis eventually faded from active worship as the Olympian age progressed. She passed the oracle of Delphi to her sister Phoebe, who in turn gave it to Apollo. She passed her role as Zeus's counselor to Hera, his third and final wife. She remained a concept, a principle, a force in the background, but she was no longer at the center of divine affairs. Perhaps this was always her destiny, to establish the foundations of order and then step back, allowing others to build upon what she had created. Themis was, after all, not a goddess of glory or fame. She was a goddess of structure, of the invisible framework that holds everything together, and such frameworks are rarely celebrated even as they remain absolutely essential. Now we come to Mnemosyne, and with her we enter into the realm of memory itself, that most mysterious and powerful of human faculties. Mnemosyne, whose very name means memory or remembrance, was the Titaness who personified the ability to recall the past, to hold experiences and knowledge within the mind, to preserve stories and histories across the passage of time. In the ancient world, before writing was widespread, memory was everything. It was the library, the archive, the record of all that had happened and all that was known. Without memory, there could be no culture, no tradition, no learning. Every story, every song, every piece of wisdom would vanish the moment it was spoken, lost forever in the relentless flow of time. Mnemosyne was essential because she made civilization possible. She was the source of language itself, for language requires memory, the ability to remember words and their meanings, to recall grammar and syntax, to connect sounds to concepts. She was the patron of poets and orators, the ones who kept the stories alive through memorization and recitation, who could speak for hours on end without consulting any written text, who could recall the genealogies of heroes and the deeds of gods with perfect accuracy. Before Homer's epics were written down, they existed only in memory, passed from one generation of bards to the next, and it was Mnemosyne who made this transmission possible. Imagine Mnemosyne as she might have appeared in the ancient world, a goddess of quiet dignity and profound wisdom. She was not flashy or dramatic like some of the other deities. She did not wield lightning bolts or command armies. Instead, she simply remembered everything. Every word ever spoken, every deed ever done, every moment of joy and sorrow and triumph and defeat, all of it was preserved within her divine consciousness, perfect and unchanging. She was the ultimate keeper of the past, the guardian of all that had come before, and in a world where the past was constantly at risk of being forgotten, her role was absolutely vital. Mnemosyne was one of the 12 Titans, a daughter of Uranus and Gaia, born in the earliest days of creation when the cosmos was still forming. Like her siblings, she represented a fundamental aspect of existence, not a physical force like the ocean or the sky, but a cognitive one, a function of consciousness that allowed for continuity across time. Without memory, each moment would be isolated, disconnected from what came before and what would come after. There would be no sense of identity, no ability to learn from experience, no way to build upon the achievements of previous generations. Mnemosyne was the thread that tied all moments together into a coherent narrative, the force that allowed the past to inform the present and shape the future. But Mnemosyne's most famous role came much later, after the Titanomachy, after Zeus had risen to power and established his rule over the cosmos. For 9 consecutive nights, Zeus came to Mnemosyne in the form of a mortal shepherd, and he lay with her, and from their union came 9 daughters, the Muses. Each of the 9 Muses presided over a different domain of art and knowledge. Calliope, the muse of epic poetry; Clio, the muse of history; Euterpe, the muse of music and lyric poetry; Erato, the muse of love poetry; Melpomene, the muse of tragedy; Polyhymnia, the muse of hymns; Terpsichore, the muse of dance; Thalia, the muse of comedy; and Urania, the muse of comedy; and Urania, the muse of astronomy. Through her daughters, Mnemosyne's influence spread throughout the entire realm of human culture and creativity. The Muses were the goddesses who inspired artists, who whispered in the ears of poets and musicians and playwrights, who granted the gift of creative vision to those who sought it. And all of this creativity, all of this art, depended fundamentally on memory. A poet needed to remember the stories they were telling, the meter and rhythm of the verses, the traditional formulas and epithets that gave structure to oral performance. A historian needed to remember the events of the past, the genealogies of kings and heroes, the dates and details that made the narrative coherent. A musician needed to remember melodies and harmonies, the progression of notes that created beauty and emotion. The connection between Mnemosyne and the Muses highlights something profound about the nature of art and culture, that all creativity is, in some sense, an act of remembering. Artists do not create from nothing. They draw upon their memories, their experiences, their knowledge of what has come before, and they recombine and reshape these elements into something new. Every story is built from older stories. Every song echoes songs that came before. Every work of art exists in dialogue with the past, and without memory, this dialogue would be impossible. In ancient Greek culture, poets would often begin their performances by invoking Mnemosyne and the Muses, asking for their assistance in accurately remembering and reciting the tales they were about to tell. Homer's epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, both begin with invocations to the Muse, calling upon her to help the poet remember and relate the story. Hesiod's Theogony, one of the primary sources for Greek mythology, explicitly names Mnemosyne as the mother of the Muses and describes how they came to him on Mount Helicon and breathed into him the divine voice of poetry. These invocations were not mere literary conventions. They reflected a genuine belief that memory was a divine gift, that the ability to remember and recount the past was something granted by the gods. Mnemosyne was also associated with certain sacred places, particularly springs and wells, that were said to grant the gift of memory to those who drank from them. Near the oracle of Trophonius in Boeotia, there were 2 springs, one called Lethe forgetfulness and one called Mnemosyne memory. Those who consulted the oracle were required to drink from both, first from Lethe to forget their mortal concerns and empty their minds, and then from Mnemosyne to remember the divine visions they would receive. This ritual emphasized the dual nature of memory, that sometimes we need to forget in order to make room for new knowledge, but that ultimately remembering is what allows us to carry wisdom back into the world. Mnemosyne's role in the Titanomachy is, like that of many female titans, not clearly described in the ancient sources. She does not appear to have fought in the war, and there is no record of her being imprisoned in Tartarus. Instead, she seems to have been one of the titans who was spared, perhaps because her gift was too valuable to lose, perhaps because Zeus recognized that memory would be essential to his new order. After all, a king needs memory to maintain his legitimacy, to recall the oaths and agreements that bind his subjects to him, to remember the lessons of the past so as not to repeat the mistakes of previous rulers. In the age of the Olympians, Mnemosyne retained her importance, though she worked primarily through her daughters, the Muses. She was the grandmother of culture, the ancestor of all art and knowledge, the goddess whose gift made it possible for humans to transcend the limitations of the present moment and connect with something larger than themselves. Every time a child learned a poem by heart, every time a bard recited an epic, every time a scholar committed facts to memory, they were honoring Mnemosyne, whether they knew it or not. Which form of knowledge do you value more? The kind that comes from books and external sources, or the kind that you've internalized and can recall from memory? For me, it has to be memory. There's something powerful about carrying knowledge within yourself, about being able to access it instantly without having to look it up, about having it become part of who you are. Mnemosyne understood this, that memory is not just storage but identity, that what we remember shapes who we are and how we understand the world. And with that understanding, we turn now to another goddess of wisdom, one whose gift was not memory but foresight, not the preservation of the past but the revelation of the future. Phoebe, the bright one, the keeper of the oracle, the titaness of prophecy and luminous intellect. Her name means bright or pure, and it speaks to her association with the moon, with silvery light, with the kind of illumination that comes not from the blazing sun but from a gentler, more mysterious source. Phoebe was the goddess of prophetic light, of the wisdom that comes from seeing beyond the present moment, of understanding the patterns and connections that reveal what is yet to come. Where Themis represented divine law and Mnemosyne represented memory, Phoebe represented insight, foresight, the ability to perceive truths that were hidden from ordinary sight. Phoebe was one of the 12 Titans, a daughter of Uranus and Gaia, sister to Oceanus and Cous and Cronus and all the rest. She married her brother Cous, the Titan of intellect and the celestial axis, and together they formed a partnership of mind and spirit, of rational thought and intuitive knowing. They had 2 daughters who would become extremely important in their own right. The first was Leto, the gentle titaness of motherhood and womanly modesty, who would bear Zeus the twin gods, Apollo and Artemis. The second was Asteria, the goddess of falling stars and nocturnal oracles, who would transform herself into a quail to escape Zeus's advances and become the island of Delos, where her sister Leto would eventually give birth. Through her daughters and grandchildren, Phoebe's influence would spread far and wide, but her most significant contribution to Greek mythology was her association with the Oracle of Delphi, one of the most sacred and important sites in the entire ancient world. The Oracle of Delphi was the place where mortals could come to consult the gods, to ask questions about the future, to receive divine guidance on matters of war and peace and personal destiny. It was, in many ways, the spiritual heart of ancient Greece, and its prophecies shaped the decisions of kings and generals and common people alike. But before Delphi belonged to Apollo, before the god of prophecy and music took control of the sacred site, it belonged to Phoebe. The story goes that the oracle was originally created by Gaia, the primordial earth, who used it to communicate with mortals and share her ancient wisdom. Gaia passed control of the oracle to her daughter Themis, who expanded its role and established many of its rituals and practices. And Themis, in turn, passed it to her sister Phoebe, recognizing that Phoebe's gift of prophetic insight made her the ideal guardian of this sacred place. For a time, Phoebe presided over Delphi, speaking through the Pythia, the high priestess who served as the oracle's voice, and delivering prophecies to those who sought them. But when her grandson Apollo was born, when Leto gave birth to the divine twins on the island of Delos, Phoebe recognized in Apollo a kindred spirit, a god whose nature was perfectly aligned with the prophetic arts. And so, as a gift for Apollo's birth, as a recognition of his destiny as the god of prophecy and light, Phoebe transferred control of the oracle of Delphi to him. She passed on not just the physical sight, but the knowledge of how to read the signs, how to interpret the whispers of fate, how to speak truth in riddles and enigmas that would make mortals think deeply about what they heard. This transfer of the oracle from Phoebe to Apollo was significant because it represented a passing of wisdom from the old generation to the new, from the Titans to the Olympians. It was an acknowledgement that the age of the Titans was ending, that the Olympians would now take on the responsibilities and roles that had once belonged to their predecessors. But it was also a gift, a gesture of generosity and foresight, a recognition that knowledge must be passed down, that each generation must learn from those who came before. Apollo, taking on the mantle of the oracle, adopted one of Phoebe's epithets, Phoebus, meaning bright or shining. He became known as Phoebus Apollo, the bright god of prophecy, music, healing, and the sun. Through this name, he carried with him the legacy of his grandmother, the reminder that his prophetic powers had their roots in the ancient wisdom of the Titans. And Delphi, under Apollo's guidance, became the most famous oracle in all of Greece, consulted by everyone from peasants seeking advice about their crops to kings planning military campaigns that would shape the fate of nations. Phoebe's association with the moon also connected her to the realm of feminine mystery and intuition. The moon, with its phases and cycles, has long been associated with prophecy and hidden knowledge, with the tides of fate that ebb and flow according to rhythms that mortals can sense but not fully understand. Phoebe represented the kind of wisdom that comes not from logic and reason alone, but from intuition, from listening to the subtle whispers of the universe, from paying attention to signs and omens that others might miss. She was, in this sense, a complement to her husband Cronus, who represented rational intellect and celestial mechanics. Together, they embodied the full spectrum of mental and spiritual perception. During the Titanomachy, Phoebe, like many of the female Titans, did not take an active role in the fighting. In fact, some accounts suggest that she sided with Zeus and the Olympians, recognizing that the new order was inevitable and that resistance would be futile. Her decision to give the oracle of Delphi to Apollo before the war even ended might have been part of this alignment with the Olympians, a way of signaling her support for the younger generation and ensuring that she would be spared the fate of those Titans who were cast into Tartarus. Phoebe's legacy lived on primarily through her descendants. Her daughter Leto became one of Zeus's most important consorts, and through Leto, Phoebe became the grandmother of two of the most significant Olympian deities, Apollo, god of prophecy, music, healing, and the sun, and Artemis, goddess of the hunt, wilderness, and the moon. Artemis, like her grandmother, would sometimes be called Phoebe in poetry and literature, an acknowledgement of the lunar and prophetic connection between them. Through these grandchildren, Phoebe's influence continued to shape Greek religion and culture long after the age of the Titans had passed. Phoebe represents a fascinating aspect of Greek mythology, the idea that wisdom and foresight are not exclusive to any one generation, that the old can teach the new, that knowledge flows forward through time, carried by those who recognize its value and pass it on to those who will come after. Her story is one of generosity and recognition, of understanding when it is time to step aside and let the next generation take the lead, while still providing guidance and support. And finally, we come to Tethys, the nurse of the world, the goddess of fresh water, the source of all rivers and springs, and the moisture that sustains life itself. Tethys, whose name means nurse or grandmother, was the titaness of the primal font of fresh water that nourished the earth, the hidden aquifers and underground streams that fed every river, every fountain, every well. She was the wife of Oceanus, and together they represented the totality of water in the cosmos. Oceanus, the great river that encircled the world, and Tethys, the source from which all smaller bodies of fresh water drew their sustenance. Imagine standing at the edge of a spring, watching clear water bubble up from deep within the earth, cold and pure and inexhaustible. That spring exists because of Tethys. She drew water from Oceanus through subterranean channels, filtering it and purifying it, distributing it across the world so that every place, no matter how far from the great encircling river, could have access to fresh water. Without Tethys, the rivers would run dry, the springs would cease to flow, the rain would stop falling from the sky. She was, in the most literal sense, the life-giver, the goddess who made it possible for anything to grow, for any creature to survive. Tethys was one of the 12 Titans, a daughter of Uranus and Gaia, born in those primordial days when the universe was still sorting itself into order. She married her brother Oceanus, and their union was one of the most fertile in all of Greek mythology. Together, they had 6,000 children, 3,000 sons, the Potamoi river gods, and 3,000 daughters, the Oceanids, nymphs of springs, streams, fountains, and rain clouds. These children spread across the entire world, inhabiting every body of fresh water, ensuring that Tethys's nourishing influence reached every corner of creation. The rivers were her sons, and each one had its own personality, its own character shaped by the land through which it flowed. Some were gentle and slow, meandering through fertile valleys. Others were swift and violent, carving deep gorges through mountains. Some were holy, associated with particular gods or heroes. Others were dangerous, known for flooding or for drowning the unwary. But all of them were children of Tethys and Oceanus. All of them carried within them the essence of fresh water, the element that makes life possible. The Oceanids, her daughters, were equally diverse and widely distributed. They were nymphs, minor goddesses who inhabited springs and ponds and streams, who watched over particular locations and cared for the plants and animals that lived there. Some of these Oceanids became famous in their own right, marrying gods or titans and bearing children who would play significant roles in mythology. Metis, the Oceanid of wisdom and cunning, became Zeus's first wife. Styx, the eldest and most powerful of the Oceanids, became the personification of the river that separated the living world from the underworld, and oaths sworn upon her name were the most binding of all vows. Clymene married the Titan Iapetus and bore Prometheus, Atlas, Epimetheus, and Menoeceus. The Oceanids were everywhere, woven into the very fabric of the world's water systems, ensuring that Tethys's gift of fresh water reached every creature that needed it. Tethys was also known as the goddess of nursing mothers, which made perfect symbolic sense. She nourished the earth just as a mother nourishes her child with milk. The connection between water and milk, between the flow of rivers and the flow of maternal sustenance, was clear to the ancient Greeks. Both represented an endless giving, a source that never ran dry, as long as the mother or the goddess remained healthy and strong. Tethys embodied the eternal feminine principle of nurturing, of providing, of sustaining life through the simple but essential act of giving what is needed. In Homer's Iliad, there is a fascinating passage where Hera uses the pretext of visiting Tethys and Oceanus to explain her absence from Olympus. Hera claims that she is going to the ends of the earth to reconcile the ancient couple, who have been quarreling and refusing to share each other's bed. Whether this story is literal or simply a convenient excuse that Hera invents is unclear, but it reveals something about how Tethys was perceived as a figure from the ancient past, dwelling at the very edges of the world, somewhat removed from the day-to-day affairs of the Olympian gods, but still respected and honored. During the Titanomachy, Tethys, like her husband Oceanus, remained neutral. She did not fight against Zeus and the Olympians, and some accounts even suggest that she provided sanctuary to Hera and her sisters during the long years of war, keeping them safe in her watery realm far from the battlefields where their brothers fought. This neutrality, this refusal to take sides in the conflict, saved Tethys from the fate that befell many of the Titans. When the war ended and Zeus cast the rebel Titans into Tartarus, Tethys was spared. She was allowed to remain in her domain, continuing her ancient role as the source of fresh water, continuing to nourish the earth as she had always done. In the age of the Olympians, Tethys retained her importance, though, like many of the Titans, she faded somewhat into the background. The new gods, Poseidon with his trident ruling over the seas, took on the more active roles, the roles that involved dramatic interventions in the affairs of mortals and gods. But Tethys remained essential in a quieter, less visible way. She was the underground aquifer, the hidden source, the foundation upon which the visible water systems of the world rested. Without her, none of it would work. Without her, the rivers would have no source, the springs would run dry, the rain clouds would have no moisture to carry. In later artistic depictions, particularly in mosaics decorating Roman baths and pools, Tethys was often shown with small wings sprouting from her brow, a symbol of her connection to the clouds and the rain that falls from the sky. Sometimes she appeared alongside Oceanus, the two of them depicted as an elderly couple, their faces weathered by time, their bodies serpentine, merging with the element they represented. These images emphasize their ancient status, their connection to the primordial past, their role as the original source of all water in the cosmos. Tethys represents something profoundly important in Greek mythology, the idea that life depends on hidden sources, on the things we cannot see but which sustain us nonetheless. We see the rivers flowing, we see the rain falling, we see the springs bubbling up from the earth, but we do not see Tethys. We do not see the vast network of underground channels through which she distributes water across the world. We do not see her constantly drawing from Oceanus, filtering and purifying, ensuring that every creature has access to the fresh water it needs to survive. But she is there, always working, always providing, the eternal nurse of the world. And so we have walked through the lives of the 6 female titans, the Titanides, who shaped the cosmos just as profoundly as their brothers did. Thea, who gave radiance to the world, who made precious metals gleam, and who bore the sun, moon, and dawn. Rhea, the great mother, who endured unspeakable suffering, and whose cunning deception saved Zeus and changed the course of history. Themis, the embodiment of divine law and order, who established the rules that even gods must follow, and who counseled Zeus in the art of just rule. Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory, whose gift made culture and civilization possible, and who bore the muses who inspire all art and creativity. Phoebe, the keeper of prophecy and bright intellect, who passed the oracle of Delphi to Apollo, and whose wisdom flowed from the old generation to the new. And Tethys, the nurse of the world, the source of all fresh water, who nourished the earth and all its creatures through the endless flow of rivers and springs. These were the Titanides. They were mothers and wives, yes, but they were also powers in their own right, goddesses whose gifts and influences were woven into the very fabric of existence. They represented sight and radiance, motherhood and cunning, justice and order, memory and culture, prophecy and wisdom, nourishment and sustenance. Without them, the cosmos would have been incomplete, missing essential elements that made life not just possible but meaningful. They were the goddesses, before the goddesses, the divine feminine that existed before Hera and Athena and Aphrodite rose to prominence. They were the foundation upon which everything else was built, the ancient powers that shaped the world, and then, for the most part, stepped back, allowing their children and grandchildren to take center stage. But they are not forgotten. Every time the sun rises and we feel warmth on our faces, we remember Thea. Every time a mother protects her child, we remember Rhea. Every time we seek justice or follow a rule of conduct, we remember Themis. Every time we recall a story or commit something to memory, we remember Mnemosyne. Every time we seek knowledge of the future or listen to our intuition, we remember Phoebe. And every time we drink fresh water from a spring or watch a river flow past, we remember Tethys. They are the invisible threads that hold the world together, the ancient goddesses whose gifts continue to sustain us, even now, even after thousands of years. To understand the Titans, you must first unlearn what you think you know about gods. When most people imagine Greek deities, they picture the Olympians, Zeus with his thunderbolt and his endless affairs, Athena with her wisdom and warrior's armor, Aphrodite emerging from sea foam with her irresistible beauty. These gods had personalities, flaws, jealousies, loves, and hatreds. They were, in essence, immortal beings with superhuman powers but distinctly human characteristics. They schemed, they loved, they betrayed, they wept. Sia. The Titans were something else entirely. They were not gods in the way the Olympians were gods. They did not possess human-like personalities or complex emotional lives. They did not form alliances based on affection or break them out of spite. The Titans were the cosmos itself given consciousness, the fundamental building blocks of reality made manifest, the raw forces of existence shaped into divine form. Consider Oceanus, the eldest brother, whom we have already met in our journey. He was not merely a god who ruled over water or controlled the seas. Oceanus was the world river, the great encircling stream that defined the boundary of all known existence. When you thought of Oceanus, you were not thinking of a being who happened to live in water or who had power over water. You were thinking of water in its most primordial, most essential form. He was the concept of boundary, of edge, of the liminal space where one thing becomes another. To encounter Oceanus was to stand at the very edge of creation and peer into the infinite unknown beyond. Or consider Hyperion, the titan of primordial light. He was not the sun. His son Helios would become that. Hyperion was the light that existed before the sun, the radiance that permeated the cosmos before celestial bodies were even formed. He was watchfulness itself, the all-seeing eye, the brilliance that revealed all things. When mortals spoke of Hyperion, they were speaking of illumination as a fundamental property of existence, the principle that allows anything to be seen at all. Mnemosyne was memory. Not a goddess with the ability to remember things particularly well, but the very concept of memory made divine. She was the faculty by which the past could be preserved, by which knowledge could accumulate, by which language itself became possible. Without Mnemosyne, each moment would exist in isolation, disconnected from every other moment. There would be no stories, no histories, no learning from experience. She was the thread that tied time together into something coherent rather than chaotic. The ancient Greeks understood this distinction instinctively, even if modern readers sometimes miss it. When Hesiod composed his Theogony describing the generations of gods, he was not merely listing powerful beings with interesting domains. He was describing a cosmological system, a way of understanding how the universe came into being and how it functions. The Titans represented the first stage of that process, the stage where abstract cosmic principles took shape and form. The universe began with chaos, the primordial void, the undifferentiated nothingness from which everything would emerge. Then came Gaia, the earth, and Uranus, the sky, the first concrete entities, the first separation of one thing from another. And from their union came the Titans, the next level of cosmic organization. Each titan represented a fundamental aspect of reality that had to exist before a more complex, more civilized world could develop. SG. Cronus was the celestial axis, the invisible pole around which the heavens rotated. He was inquiry itself, the questioning mind, the intellectual force that seeks to understand. Cronus was the constellations, the measure of the year, the ordering of time through celestial markers. Iapetus was mortality, the inevitability of endings, the principle that all things, even divine things, must eventually come to a close. Cronus was devouring time, the force that consumes all things, that turns youth into age and life into death. These were not beings with free will in any meaningful sense. They could not choose to be other than what they were, because they were what they were. Oceanus could not decide one day to stop being the world river any more than water itself could decide to stop being wet. Hyperion could not choose to dim his light or redirect his gaze because he was light and watchfulness themselves. This is why the Titans often seem so static in the myths, so unchanging and unchangeable. They did not grow, did not evolve, did not learn from their experiences in the way that the Olympians would. They simply existed, performing their cosmic functions, maintaining the structure of reality. They were the stage upon which the drama of existence would be performed, not the actors themselves. And this is what made the Titanomachy, the great war between Titans and Olympians, so significant. It was not merely a battle between two groups of powerful beings fighting for supremacy. It was a fundamental transformation of the cosmos itself, a shift from a universe governed by impersonal forces to one governed by conscious, willful beings with complex personalities and relationships. It was the moment when the universe gained the capacity for change, for narrative, for drama. The Titans represented the old way, the way of cosmic law and inexorable force, where everything happened according to fixed patterns and nothing could be other than what it was. The Olympians represented the new way, the way of personality and choice and consequence, where gods could love and hate and betray and forgive, where stories could unfold in unexpected directions. The defeat of the Titans was the defeat of that static, unchanging cosmos and the birth of a more dynamic, more human world. The poets called it the Golden Age, and by all accounts, it was paradise. During the reign of Cronus, after he had castrated his father Uranus and claimed the throne, the world knew a peace and prosperity unlike anything that would come before or after. The earth produced food without cultivation. Crops sprang up without being sown, fruit ripened without tending. Mortals lived like gods, free from labor, free from disease, free from the ravages of old age. When death finally came, it came as gently as sleep, a peaceful fading rather than a violent end. There was no war in those days, no conflict, no strife. The seasons were perpetually mild, neither too hot nor too cold. Rivers flowed with honey and milk as well as water. The air itself seemed sweeter, purer, infused with a quality of ease and abundance that made simply existing a pleasure. This was a world where scarcity did not exist, where competition was unnecessary, where harmony reigned supreme. But there was something profoundly unsettling about this paradise, something that the ancient Greeks understood even as they romanticized it. The Golden Age was perfect, yes, but it was also utterly stagnant. Nothing changed because nothing could change. There was no progress, no innovation, no art or culture worth speaking of because there was no need for any of it. Why struggle to improve agriculture when the earth provides everything you need without effort? Why develop technology when there are no problems that require solving? Why create beauty when you are surrounded by perfect abundance? This was a world frozen in time, locked into a single, eternal moment of satiation. And the reason for this stasis, the terrible secret at the heart of this perfect world, was fear. Cronus, the king of this paradise, ruled not through wisdom or justice, but through paranoia. He had overthrown his father through violence, and he knew, because Uranus had cursed him with the knowledge, that his own children would one day do the same to him. So Cronus devoured his children. Each time Rhea gave birth, each time a new god entered the world, Cronus would take the infant and swallow it whole, imprisoning it in his belly where it could not grow, could not mature, could not fulfill the prophecy. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, all of them consumed, all of them trapped in the darkness of their father's stomach. This is the chilling irony of the Golden Age. The peace, the abundance, the harmony, all of it was built on an act of monstrous cruelty. The world could not move forward because its king was terrified of the future. Progress was impossible because progress meant change, and change meant the possibility that the prophecy would be fulfilled. So Cronus held the world in stasis, maintaining the perfect conditions of the Golden Age, not out of benevolence, but out of desperate self-preservation. The ancient Greeks saw this clearly, even if later cultures sometimes missed the darker implications. The Golden Age was not a utopia to be longed for. It was a cautionary tale about the dangers of stagnation, about what happens when a society becomes so comfortable that it loses the capacity for growth. It was a world without heroes, because there were no challenges to overcome. It was a world without art, because there was no struggle to inspire creativity. It was a world without meaning, because meaning emerges from change, from difficulty, from the tension between what is and what could be. Cronus himself embodied this paradox. He was both the source of abundance and the force of consumption. His very name was associated with time, Chronos, the time that devours all things, that turns everything to dust. He gave his subjects prosperity, but he devoured his own children. He maintained peace, but only by preventing any possibility of change. He was, in essence, a tyrant who had convinced himself that his tyranny was necessary, that without his iron control, everything would descend into chaos, nausea. And perhaps this is the most unsettling aspect of the Golden Age. The suggestion that paradise and tyranny might not be opposites, but rather two sides of the same coin. Perfect peace requires perfect control. Perfect abundance requires the elimination of all competition, all ambition, all desire for something more. The Golden Age was a world where everyone had everything they needed, but no one had the freedom to want something different. This tension, this dark undercurrent running beneath the surface of paradise, is what made the Golden Age unstable. It could not last precisely because it was based on a lie, the lie that perfection could be maintained through force, that the future could be prevented if only you held on tightly enough. But the future cannot be held back forever. Rhea, driven to desperation by the loss of 5 children, finally found the courage to deceive her husband. She gave birth to Zeus in secret, hid him in a cave on Crete, and tricked Cronus into swallowing a stone wrapped in blankets. That deception, that single act of maternal cunning and courage, was the seed that would eventually shatter the Golden Age. Zeus grew to maturity in his hidden cave, nursed by nymphs, guarded by warriors who clashed their shields to drown out his cries. And when he finally returned, when he finally forced Cronus to regurgitate his siblings, the perfect stasis of the Golden Age came to an abrupt and violent end. The Golden Age died not because it was flawed in some obvious way, not because people were suffering or starving or fighting. It died because it was built on fear, because it required the suppression of the future, because its perfection was maintained through an act of ongoing horror. It was a world that could not accommodate new gods, new ideas, new possibilities. And when those new gods finally broke free from the belly of their father, when Zeus and his siblings declared war on the Titans, they were not just fighting for power. They were fighting for the right to change, to grow, to become something other than what their father had decreed they must be. For 10 years the cosmos burned. The Titanomachy was not a war in any conventional sense. It was a cataclysm, a cosmic rupture, a conflict so vast and so violent that the very fabric of reality groaned under its weight. This was not a battle fought with human weapons or human tactics. This was a war between fundamental forces of nature, between the old order and the new, between stasis and change.1wc. The battle lines were drawn with stark clarity. Zeus and his siblings, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, made their stand on Mount Olympus, the sacred mountain that would eventually give their generation its name. Cronus and the Titans arrayed themselves on Mount Othrys, another Thessalian peak, and between these two mountains, the fate of the universe would be decided. Why? But it was not simply a matter of two groups of gods hurling themselves at each other in mindless combat. Zeus understood, with the cunning that would define his reign, that victory would require more than brute force. He needed allies, and he knew exactly where to find them. Deep in the pit of Tartarus, in the lightless abyss beneath the foundations of the world, Cronus had imprisoned the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires, the three one-eyed giants, and the 300-handed monsters who had been born alongside the Titans, but had been locked away for their terrible appearance. Zeus descended into that terrible darkness, fought the dragon Campe who guarded the prisoners, and freed them. It was a masterstroke, one that would turn the tide of the war. The Cyclopes, grateful for their liberation, immediately set to work forging weapons of unimaginable power. For Zeus, they crafted the thunderbolt, a bolt of concentrated divine lightning that could shatter mountains and incinerate anything it touched. For Poseidon, they forged the trident, a three-pronged spear that could shake the earth and command the seas. For Hades, they created the Helm of Darkness, a helmet that rendered its wearer invisible and allowed him to move unseen even among the gods. Ye sty. But even more valuable than these weapons were the Hecatoncheires themselves. These three giants, Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges, each possessed 100 hands and 50 heads, and their strength was beyond comprehension. When they entered the battlefield, they became living siege engines, hurling boulders by the hundreds, raining stone down upon the Titans in an endless barrage. Each of them could throw 300 rocks simultaneously, and the effect was devastating. A storm of stone never ceased, never paused, never gave the Titans a moment to recover. Dies HD. The war itself was apocalyptic in scale. When Zeus hurled his thunderbolts, the sky itself caught fire, burning with a light so intense that it seemed as if the heavens themselves were being consumed. The bolts struck mountains and split them open, sending avalanches of rock cascading down into the valleys below. The earth shook and cracked, great chasms opening up to swallow whole forests and cities. Cu. Poseidon struck the ground with his trident, and earthquakes rippled outward in concentric circles, toppling whatever structures still stood, sending tidal waves crashing against distant shores. The seas boiled under the intensity of the conflict, fish and sea creatures dying by the millions as the water heated to temperatures nothing could survive. The Titans fought back with all their primordial strength. They were the old gods, the forces that had shaped the cosmos, and they did not go down easily. Atlas, the strongest of all the Titans, led the battlefield strategies, his immense power coordinating the Titan forces with devastating efficiency. Menoetius fought with reckless fury until Zeus struck him down with a thunderbolt, incinerating him and casting his shade into Erebus. Iapetus wielded weapons of ancient power, fighting alongside his son Atlas even as his other son, Prometheus, betrayed the Titans by supporting Zeus. Y. For 10 years, neither side could gain a decisive advantage. Both armies were evenly matched, both possessed weapons and warriors of terrible might, and the cosmos trembled under the weight of their conflict. The air itself became chaos, filled with smoke and ash, and the screams of divine beings locked in mortal combat. The Titans threw mountains at the Olympians, tearing peaks from their foundations and hurling them across the battlefield. The Olympians retaliated with lightning and earthquake and the endless barrage of stones from the hecatoncheires. Hades, wearing his helm of darkness, moved unseen through the Titan camp, sabotaging their weapons and armaments, destroying their ability to maintain an organized defense. This invisible warfare, combined with the overwhelming firepower of Zeus's thunderbolts and the endless assault of the hecatoncheires, finally began to tip the balance not. One by one the Titans fell, not killed, for gods are immortal, but defeated, overwhelmed, forced to submit. And when the last of them finally surrendered, when Atlas and Cronus and all the others who had fought against Zeus finally laid down their arms, the judgment was swift and terrible. Zeus cast them into Tartarus. That lightless pit, that void so deep that a bronze anvil dropped from the earth would fall for 9 days before striking bottom, became their prison. The hecatoncheires, those 100-handed giants who had fought so fiercely for the Olympians, were set as guards, ensuring that the Titans would never escape, would never again threaten the new order. Atlas received a special punishment for his role as the Titans' battlefield leader. Zeus condemned him to stand at the western edge of the world, holding up the sky on his shoulders for all eternity. He could never rest, never sleep, never be relieved of his burden. He became the ultimate symbol of defeated strength, powerful enough to bear the weight of the heavens, but powerless to ever set that weight down. The Titanomachy changed everything. It was not merely a transfer of power from one generation to another, it was a fundamental transformation of the cosmos itself. The universe that existed before the war was governed by impersonal forces, by the inexorable laws represented by the Titans. The universe that emerged after the war was governed by willful beings with complex personalities, by gods who could be reasoned with, negotiated with, who made decisions based on passion and intellect rather than simply embodying cosmic principles. The victory of the Olympians meant that the world became more dynamic, more unpredictable, more open to change. It meant that mortals could pray to the gods and sometimes be heard, could sacrifice and receive favor, could form relationships with the divine powers that shaped their lives. Under the Titans, such things had been impossible. You cannot negotiate with the concept of time or make offerings to the principle of the ocean. The scars of the Titanomachy never fully healed. The earth still bore the marks of that terrible conflict. Mountains that had been torn from their foundations and hurled across the landscape, valleys created by the impact of divine weapons, regions where nothing would grow because the soil had been scorched by Zeus's lightning. And deep beneath the world, in the darkness of Tartarus, the defeated Titans endured their imprisonment, a reminder that every new order is built on the ruins of the old, that every beginning requires an ending, that transformation always comes at a price. The Titans may have fallen, but their legacy endured through their children, a remarkable generation of deities who would shape the cosmos in ways their parents never could. These second-generation Titans occupy a strange position in Greek mythology, neither fully of the old order nor completely integrated into the new. They were born of the ancient forces but came of age in the world of the Olympians, and many of them would play crucial roles in the great myths that defined Greek culture. In years. Perhaps the most famous of these children was Prometheus, the forethinker, the Titan whose name means "he who thinks ahead." Born to Iapetus and the Oceanid Clymene, Prometheus was the cleverest of all the Titans, possessing a gift of foresight that allowed him to see the consequences of actions before they occurred. This gift made him unique among his generation. While his father Iapetus fought alongside Cronus in the Titanomachy, Prometheus refused to participate, having foreseen that Zeus would win. But Prometheus's greatest act was not his refusal to fight. It was his gift to humanity. According to the myths, Prometheus shaped the first humans from clay, crafting them in the image of the gods and breathing life into them. But Zeus, jealous and suspicious of these new creatures, withheld fire from them, condemning humanity to live in darkness and cold. Prometheus, moved by compassion for his creations, defied Zeus by stealing fire from the heavens and giving it to mortals. This single act changed everything. Fire meant warmth, light, the ability to cook food and forge metal and create civilization. Fire meant that humans could transcend their limitations, could become something more than mere animals struggling to survive. But it also meant that Prometheus had directly challenged Zeus's authority, had placed the welfare of mortals above obedience to the king of the gods. Dry. The punishment was terrible. Zeus had Prometheus chained to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains where an eagle would come each day to devour his liver. Each night the liver would regenerate, and the next day the eagle would return, condemning Prometheus to an eternity of suffering. Yet even in torment, Prometheus remained defiant, refusing to submit to Zeus, refusing to reveal the prophecy he knew about the king's eventual downfall. Prometheus's brother Atlas shared his father's fate, but in a different form. As the battlefield leader of the Titans during the Titanomachy, Atlas bore special responsibility for the rebellion. His punishment was to hold up the sky itself, to stand at the western edge of the world bearing the weight of the heavens on his shoulders for all eternity. Not my. Atlas was said to be the strongest of all the Titans, his power eclipsing even that of his father Iapetus. This immense strength was both his gift and his curse. He was strong enough to bear the burden Zeus assigned him, but not strong enough to ever set it down. He became a living pillar, separating earth from sky, ensuring that the cosmos maintained its structure. The image of Atlas bearing the heavens has resonated throughout Western culture, becoming a symbol of endurance, of carrying impossible burdens, of strength tested to its absolute limits. He appears in countless artworks, usually depicted as a muscular figure bent under the weight of a celestial sphere, his face contorted with the strain of his eternal labor. But not all of the second-generation Titans suffered such grim fates. Helios, the son of Hyperion and Theia, became the god of the sun, driving his golden chariot across the sky each day from east to west. Unlike his father Hyperion, who represented primordial light itself, Helios was the actual sun, a physical celestial body that could be observed, tracked, worshipped. Longinus. Helios was all-seeing because his light reached every corner of the earth. Nothing could hide from his gaze as he made his daily journey across the heavens. This made him a witness to countless events that other gods missed. He saw Persephone being abducted by Hades, saw Aphrodite's affair with Ares, knew secrets that others could only guess at. His sister Selene became the goddess of the moon, riding across the night sky in her silver chariot. Where Helios brought the harsh clarity of daylight, Selene offered the softer illumination of moonlight, transforming the world into a realm of shadows and mystery. Her pale light guided travelers at night, inspired poets and lovers, and marked the passage of months through her waxing and waning. Their sister Eos, the rosy-fingered dawn, opened the gates of heaven each morning to allow Helios to begin his journey. She was the herald of the day, the first light that touched the eastern horizon, the promise that darkness would not last forever. Eos was cursed by Aphrodite to forever desire mortal lovers, and she abducted many beautiful young men, carrying them away to her palace at the edge of the world. These three siblings, Helios, Selene, and Eos, represented the ordering of time itself through celestial movements. Their daily and nightly journeys marked the passage of days. Their phases and positions tracked the movement of months and seasons. They were the clocks of the ancient world, the natural timekeepers that allowed humans to organize their lives and predict the future. The second-generation Titans also included figures like Perseus, father of Hecate, the goddess of magic and crossroads, Astraeus, who married Eos and fathered the winds and the stars, Pallas, the Titan of warcraft who would be defeated by Athena and whose name she would take as an epithet, Each of these figures represented a bridging between the old world of the Titans and the new world of the Olympians. What makes the second-generation Titans so fascinating is their liminality. They were neither fully of the old order nor completely integrated into the new. Prometheus defied Zeus but also helped establish the world Zeus ruled. Atlas fought against the Olympians but then became an essential structural element of their cosmos. Helios, Selene and Eos continued to perform their celestial functions regardless of who ruled from Olympus. They represent the idea that change is never complete, that revolution always carries forward elements of what came before. The Olympians may have defeated the Titans, may have cast them into Tartarus and claimed supremacy over the cosmos, but they could not function without the contributions of the Titans' children. They needed Prometheus's gift of fire to make humanity capable of worship. They needed Atlas to hold up the sky. They needed Helios to mark the passage of days. The second-generation Titans also embodied different aspects of the Titan legacy. Where the first generation represented abstract cosmic principles, the second generation represented more specific, more accessible concepts. Prometheus was not forethought as an abstract principle, but rather clever planning and compassion for mortals. Atlas was not endurance in the abstract, but rather the specific burden of holding up the heavens. Helios was not light, but the actual sun that rose each morning. This specificity made them more relatable, more like the Olympians in some ways, even as their Titan heritage set them apart. They were the bridge between two ages, the link connecting the primordial past to the dynamic present, the proof that even in defeat, the Titans' influence remained essential to the functioning of the cosmos. When the Titanomachy finally ended after 10 years of cosmic warfare, Zeus faced a question that would define his entire reign: what to do with the defeated Titans. They were immortal. They could not be killed, could not be unmade, could not simply be erased from existence. Yet they could not be allowed to roam free, could not be permitted to remain in positions where they might threaten the new order Zeus had fought so hard to establish. The solution was Tartarus. That primordial pit, that void beneath the underworld, that space so deep and so far removed from the light of the sun that it seemed to exist outside of creation itself. Hesiod described it with frightening precision. If a bronze anvil were dropped from the earth, it would fall for 9 days and 9 nights before striking the bottom. It was a place of absolute darkness, absolute isolation, a prison from which there could be no escape. Into this abyss, Zeus cast the defeated Titans. Cronus, who had once ruled the Golden Age, who had devoured his own children to prevent the prophecy of his downfall. Iapetus, the Western Pillar, the Titan of mortality. Hyperion, the blazing light, cast into eternal darkness. Cronus, the inquiring mind, imprisoned where there was nothing to observe or question. Creus, the forgotten keeper of stars, separated forever from the constellations he had measured. Die. To ensure they could never escape, Zeus set the Hecaton chairs as guards. These 300-handed giants, who had fought so fiercely for the Olympians during the war, now stood eternal watch over the Titans' prison. With their 100 hands and 50 heads each, they could repel any attempt at escape, could throw down any who tried to climb from that terrible depth. The imprisonment of the Titans was not simply a practical matter of neutralizing a threat. It was a symbolic act of cosmic significance, a statement about the nature of the new order Zeus was establishing. The Titans represented the old way, the universe as a collection of impersonal forces, of inexorable laws, of principles that could not be negotiated with or reasoned with. By imprisoning them, Zeus was not merely defeating his enemies, he was suppressing the very concept of a deterministic, unchanging cosmos. The new order would be different. Under Zeus and the Olympians, the universe would be governed not by impersonal cosmic principles, but by conscious beings with personalities, desires, and the capacity for choice. These gods could be prayed to, negotiated with, influenced by sacrifice and worship. They had favorites among mortals, interfered in human affairs, formed relationships and alliances and enmities. This was a more human universe, one that made sense to the mortals who lived in it. You could understand why Zeus might be angry with you. Perhaps you had failed to honor him properly or supported someone he opposed. You could understand why Athena might help you. Perhaps your cause aligned with justice and wisdom which she valued. The cosmos became navigable in a way it had not been under the Titans, when you were subject to forces you could neither understand nor influence. But this transition came at a cost. The Titans, for all their alien nature, represented something important: stability, predictability, the assurance that the universe followed certain fundamental laws. Under the Olympians, the cosmos became more chaotic, more subject to the whims and passions of individual deities. Zeus might spare a city or destroy it based on whether he was in a good mood that day. Hera might persecute innocent mortals simply because they were Zeus's lovers or children. The imprisonment of the Titans represented the suppression of cosmic order in favor of divine personality. It was a trade-off: predictability for accessibility, cosmic law for divine relationship. The ancient Greeks understood this implicitly, even as they celebrated Zeus's victory. They knew that the gods were capricious, that divine favor could be withdrawn as quickly as it was granted, that the universe under Olympian rule was more dangerous in some ways, even as it became more comprehensible. Not all the Titans were imprisoned. Oceanus, who had remained neutral during the war, was allowed to continue circling the earth in his endless river. Tethys continued to nourish the world with fresh water. Themis, who had actually sided with Zeus, became his advisor and second wife, helping him establish the laws and principles that would govern the new order. Prometheus, though he would later be punished for his theft of fire, was not imprisoned after the Titanomachy because he had not fought against Zeus. This selective punishment reveals Zeus's strategic thinking. He did not simply destroy or imprison every member of the previous generation. He recognized that some Titans represented principles too important to lose, that the cosmos still needed the boundaries of Oceanus, the nourishment of Tethys, the justice of Themis. The new order he was building required incorporating valuable elements of the old, even as it superseded them. The fate of the imprisoned Titans varies depending on which source you consult. Some traditions hold that they remained in Tartarus forever, eternally punished for their rebellion, eternally separated from the world they had once ruled. Other accounts suggest that Zeus eventually released them, perhaps recognizing that their punishment had been sufficient, perhaps deciding that reconciliation served his purposes better than eternal imprisonment. But whether they were released or remained imprisoned, the Titans' age had ended. The cosmos had been fundamentally transformed, shifted from one operating principle to another. The world of impersonal forces had given way to the world of personality and choice. The static perfection of the Golden Age had been replaced by the dynamic, changing, often chaotic world of the Olympians. The punishment of the Titans was the price of that transformation. They were cast into darkness so that the world could move forward into light, imprisoned so that the cosmos could be free to change and evolve. They became the foundation upon which the new order was built, literally, in the case of Atlas, who held up the sky, but metaphorically as well, as the suppressed principles that still operated beneath the surface of Olympian rule. Verse 9. Every time the sun rose in the same pattern, every time the ocean remained at the edge of the world, every time memory preserved the past, the Titans' influence persisted. They were gone but not erased, defeated but not destroyed, imprisoned but still essential. They were the cosmic constants that made it possible for the variable, unpredictable Olympians to rule without the universe descending into complete chaos. They were the price of progress, the cost of change, the sacrifice required for the world to move from one age to the next. And so, dreamers, we come to the end of our journey through the age of the Titans, those first gods who were not gods in the way we understand divinity, but rather the living embodiment of the cosmos itself. We have walked alongside Oceanus at the edge of existence, felt the weight that Atlas bears upon his shoulders, witnessed the terrible price Prometheus paid for his love of humanity, and watched as Zeus cast the old order into darkness so that a new world could be born not nigh. The story of the Titans is ultimately a story about change, about the inevitable transformation that comes when one age gives way to another. They were the personifications of cosmic law, unchanging, eternal, absolute. But the universe they created, perfect and static though it was, could not last forever. The Golden Age, for all its abundance and peace, was built on fear, maintained through violence, held in place by a king who devoured his own children to prevent the future from arriving. When the Titanomachy finally shattered that frozen world, when Zeus and his siblings broke free and waged 10 years of cosmic war, they were not simply fighting for power. They were fighting for the right to be something other than what their father had decreed, for a universe that could grow and change and surprise itself. The defeat of the Titans was the defeat of inevitability, the triumph of possibility over predetermined fate. And yet, the Titans never truly left us. They linger in the foundations of reality, in the boundaries that Oceanus still marks, in the celestial axis around which the heavens turn, in the memory that preserves our past and the time that devours our future. They persist in their children, in Helios, who drives the sun across the sky, in Prometheus, who gave us fire and paid eternally for his compassion, in Atlas, who holds up the weight of the heavens so that earth and sky do not collapse back into primordial chaos. The ancient Greeks understood something profound when they told these stories. They understood that progress requires sacrifice, that new worlds can only be built on the ruins of old ones, that every beginning is also an ending. The Titans were cast into Tartarus not because they were evil, but because they represented a way of being that could not coexist with the dynamic, changing world the Olympians would create. They were the price of transformation, the cost of moving from a universe of law to a universe of personality and choice. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, remember the Titans. Remember that you are living in a world they made possible, that every star you see follows paths they ordained, that every river flows from sources they created, that the very passage of time itself bears the mark of Cronus, who ruled and fell and endures still in the inexorable march of moments. Remember that even the mightiest can fall, that even the eternal can change, but that nothing is ever truly lost, only transformed, reshaped, carried forward into whatever comes next. Ca. The Titans held up the sky so that we could live beneath it. They measured the stars so that we could navigate by them. They embodied memory so that we could learn from our past. They were the first gods, the foundation upon which everything else was built, and though they were defeated and imprisoned, though their age ended in fire and war and darkness, their legacy remains woven into the very fabric of existence. Thank you for journeying with me tonight, dreamers, through these ancient stories of creation and destruction, of power and its inevitable loss, of gods who were forces and forces that became gods. I hope these tales have brought you closer to that peaceful place where consciousness fades and dreams begin, where the boundaries dissolve and the ancient stories live again in the theatre of your sleeping mind, my twin. May you rest well beneath the sky that Atlas holds. May your dreams be lit by the light of Hyperion's children. May you remember what is worth remembering and release what is not. May you wake refreshed to face whatever new age is dawning in your own life. The Titans may have fallen, but their story, and yours, continues. Good night, dreamers. Until we meet again in these liminal spaces between waking and sleeping, between the known and the mysterious, between the old gods and the new. Sleep well, and may the ancient wisdom of the Titans guard your rest. Good night.